Greetings, everyone. American superweapons are powerless. Ukraine has just stepped in to save the day in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, the Iran battle of 2026 has dealt a devastating blow to illusions about traditional military power. When the supposedly invulnerable U.S. military bases in the Middle East became uninhabitable and billion-dollar defense systems were subdued by cheap swarms of drones, the world was shocked to realize that the rules of warfare had completely changed. Amid the chaos of devastated oil refineries in the Gulf region, an unexpected savior emerged. It was not a Western superpower, but Ukraine, a country that was itself struggling in a life-and-death war with Russia. Why are the oil giants of the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia to Qatar, willing to place their security in the hands of Kiev? At the end of March, the New York Times made shocking claims that many U.S. military bases in the Middle East had been attacked so heavily that they were almost unable to remain operational. From refineries to energy fields spread across the region, even the extremely important natural gas liquefaction facility in Qatar was heavily damaged in successive drone and ballistic missile attacks from Iran. Iran precisely targeted decoy stations, hotels, and even high-rise buildings, even issuing threats as far as the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Even more terrifying, they managed to destroy one of the few operational E-3 Sanchi aircraft of the U.S., which is considered one of the most important military planes on the planet. Although air defense systems across the Middle East tried to intercept most of those intense attacks, when an opponent is capable of launching dozens or even hundreds of flying objects at once, intercepting the majority is still not enough to prevent disaster. Currently, Ukraine is doing its utmost to provide maximum protection for the Middle East region wherever possible. For the Kiev government, this partnership is not without significant sacrifices. Their drone operators and air defense experts are more in demand than ever on their own front lines at home, where Russia is trying to make new advances in an insidious spring offensive. However, if Ukraine can successfully enhance security for the Gulf countries while still holding the front against the Russians, the rewards will be tremendous for all parties involved. To understand the solution that Ukraine is striving to provide for the Persian Gulf countries, we must start by understanding the nature of the problem these countries are facing. In short, the core issue lies in two words: air defense. Iran is not a country that possesses a great deal of strong, traditional offensive capabilities. Even before the Middle East conflict broke out in 2026, Iran's army was unable to project its power beyond its own land borders. Iran lacks bombers or an air force strong enough to gain air superiority over any modern opponent, and their navy is barely taken seriously. Instead, Iran has relied on a combination of long-range ballistic missiles, flexible cruise missiles, and long-range suicide drones to attack its enemies. Their practical limitations are not only in the diversity of their arsenal, but Iran's missiles and drones also lack the necessary range. They definitely don't have the range to reach the United States. Instead, when the U.S. entered the Persian Gulf this year to try to assert dominance over Tehran, the Iranian regime responded by targeting any neighboring country within range, places that hold strategic value for both the United States and Israel. Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and many others have had to bear the full brunt of these attacks. These raids mainly targeted the ability to exploit energy resources such as oil and natural gas, as well as the facilities used to process and export them worldwide. Of course, the Gulf countries were well aware of the value of these assets even before the war began. In urgent warnings sent to Washington, they tried to explain the catastrophic risk to the American leadership, but the United States either didn't believe them or simply didn't care much. When the gunfire began, the warnings from the Gulf countries proved to be completely accurate. To prepare for this worst-case scenario, countries in the region stockpiled a large variety of air defense systems to shoot down incoming drones and missiles. In the weeks leading up to the outbreak of war, the United States supplemented those air defense systems with additional military equipment shipped in from around the world. The U.S. also concentrated a dense defense network at more than a dozen of its bases in the region. Many of these bases are located near major urban centers or key economic targets. It must be made clear that the air defense systems deployed throughout the Persian Gulf are very effective in their roles, but at the same time, they also face some critical limitations. First, each different air defense system is designed to deal with different types of threats. A system built to intercept ballistic missiles cannot deal with low-flying drones, and vice versa. Second, these air defense systems are extremely expensive, much more costly than the drones and missiles that Iran is using. Iran may only need about $50,000 to produce a highly effective Shahed 136 drone. But if a U.S. Patriot system locks onto the target and shoots down that drone with an interceptor missile, even if it's successful, that missile will have cost the U.S. or its allies more than $4 million. The United States and the Gulf countries are certainly wealthier than Iran, so for that reason, this huge cost difference might be acceptable in limited conflicts. But when Iran starts launching thousands of missiles and drones, the story completely changes. The third issue with modern air defense stems from the characteristics of the drones often used by Iran. These drones are not completely stealthy, but they are equipped with features that limit radar reflection, making them harder to detect. They fly at much lower speeds and altitudes than the thresholds for which interceptor missiles are designed to operate. That's why accurately identifying them as a threat becomes extremely difficult, and they can easily slip through air defense systems under the right conditions, especially when launched in a swarm attack. The fourth issue is that every air defense system is limited by the number of interceptor missiles it can launch before needing to reload. Remember, a Patriot battery is equipped with a total of 32 PAC-2 missiles, but if it faces a swarm of 40 drones at once, even with perfect accuracy, 8 drones will still get through and hit the target simply because the battery can't reload fast enough. Even worse, the stockpile of interceptor missiles starts to run out quickly when the conflict really enters an intense phase. To get an idea of the massive volume of firepower that Gulf countries have to face, statistics from just the first 10 days show that the United Arab Emirates shot down 241 ballistic missiles and nearly 1,400 drones. And that's just the data from a single country in less than 1/3 of the total duration of the conflict. The number of interceptor missiles worldwide is limited, and they can't be produced overnight. America's best Patriot missile, the PAC-3, was being produced at a rate of 600 units per year when the conflict began, and the production rate for the THAAD high-altitude interceptor system was even lower, only about 96 units per year. These numbers can be significantly increased over time, and in fact, the U.S. has already made the necessary investments to expand production capacity. However, that process requires several months to set up new production lines and takes years to replenish stockpiles while still meeting new demands arising from the battlefield. By mid-March, the Gulf countries were forced to bitterly admit to Washington that they were in a desperate situation. They had to carefully choose which targets were worth intercepting and which ones to let go, just to avoid completely running out of ammunition. Facing the overwhelming firepower from Iran, the United States had to urgently withdraw interceptor missiles from Europe, from the Indo-Pacific region, and even deplete its deepest strategic reserves just to try to keep up with that frenzied pace of attacks. By the time the conflict temporarily subsided, reports from the U.S., Israel, and a number of Gulf countries all pointed to a harsh reality. The situation had reached a severe crisis point. In normal circumstances, it's hard to believe that the oil-rich Gulf powers would have to look for an alternative weapons supplier to place large orders. After all, these wealthy countries have always been Washington's most loyal and generous customers. The devastation of the Iran war has far exceeded the usual patterns of history. Within just a few weeks after the gunfire erupted, Middle Eastern leaders began proactively reaching out and seeking out Zelensky. Because more than any other country on this planet, including the United States, Ukraine has developed an extraordinary and unique capability in conducting a war of attrition using drones and long-range missiles. In the life-and-death war with Russia, Ukraine has had to fight in an environment where the skies have become too dangerous for any manned aircraft from either side. And it is drone technology that has been pushed forward to fill that gap, since they do not have the abundant military budgets of leading economies. Even with foreign support, Ukraine has been forced to go all in on finding low-cost solutions to massive military challenges. And in most cases, drones have been their saving grace. Ukraine's drones are now considered among the best in the world, coveted not only for their impressive range and diverse designs, but also for the rapid design and improvement process that has kept Ukraine at the forefront of adaptation. In offensive operations, Ukrainian drones provide continuous real-time surveillance across an endless front line, carrying out bombing runs or suicide attacks in coordinated swarms. But Ukraine doesn't stop there. They have also improved drones for specialized air defense roles, developing flexible interceptors capable of destroying enemy drones as soon as they approach. Since Russia relies heavily on drone models modified from Iranian platforms, Ukraine has gained extensive experience in dealing with exactly the types of drones that Iran is now launching toward Gulf countries. Their operators are battle-hardened experts, trained through intense, full-scale conflicts fought at a relentless pace. In short, Ukraine's drone technology is the perfect fit that Gulf countries are looking for to fill the air defense gaps Washington cannot fill. The bigger question, at least in the early stages, is whether Ukraine is willing to give up the valuable technologies they've paid for with their own blood, while they themselves are still fighting for survival. For years, Kyiv has banned exporting defense equipment, blueprints, designs, and component technologies to keep all resources focused on confronting Russia. Ukraine is not wealthy, but more importantly, they are even more short on manpower at the rear and have almost no ability to send their best drone or air defense experts away from the battlefield. However, despite those mounting personnel difficulties, on March 18, the Kyiv government made a breakthrough by announcing the deployment of 201 counter-drone experts to the Middle East to support partner governments across the Persian Gulf region. At that time, dozens of other experts were also ready to depart and would soon arrive in the region. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, these teams of experts were sent to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and several other countries. Beyond manpower, Mr. Zelensky also revealed a shocking piece of information that Ukraine has developed outstanding production capabilities, especially in the ability to manufacture interceptor drones. As of mid-March, according to his own estimates, Ukraine can produce at least 2,000 interceptor drones per day, while only half of that number is enough to protect Ukraine's skies. Mr. Zelensky confidently affirmed that if a Shahed needs to be destroyed in the United Arab Emirates, we can do it. If it needs to be destroyed in Europe or the United Kingdom, we are also ready to do it. By the end of that month, Zelensky made a tour across the Middle East to make these agreements a reality. In Saudi Arabia, he had an important meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to discuss a 10-year defense agreement allowing Ukraine to exchange technology and experience, while paving the way for huge investments and establishing a legal framework for future contracts. In Qatar, Zelensky signed a partnership agreement to participate in technology sectors, develop joint projects, invest in defense, and exchange expertise in countering missiles and unmanned aerial systems. Similar to Saudi Arabia, cooperation with Qatar will mainly focus on training and sharing countermeasure technology. The United Arab Emirates also quickly signed a similar agreement shortly afterward. In any case, many specific details were not disclosed, and some terms were left deliberately vague. Everyone knows Ukraine is considering setting up production lines in its Middle Eastern partners' territories. By early April, Ukraine continued negotiations with Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman to pursue similar cooperation agreements. All these developments are taking place despite rumors of disappointment and frustration from the United States, where defense officials are said to be quite upset with the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, for seeking agreements outside of Washington's control. However, as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia has bluntly reminded the U.S. side, their defense decisions are entirely for Saudi Arabia's national interests. For both Riyadh and other Gulf capitals, their highest national interest at this time is to pursue any measures that can stop the attacks heading their way. For the Gulf countries, the benefits of cooperating with Ukraine are all too clear. Ukraine has technical knowledge, battlefield experience, operational capability, and a specialized counter-drone arsenal unmatched by the United States or others. However, for Ukraine, the reason behind this decision doesn't seem so obvious at first. After all, Ukraine still has its own vital issues that need to be addressed. Even if the country had surplus interceptors or production capacity, it would still be unusual for Mr. Zelensky and his allies in the government to put everything aside to support the Middle East. But in reality, Ukraine's decision was driven by an extremely astute strategic calculation. It's not simply about building goodwill with the world or polishing their reputation, but about bringing Ukraine closer to victory over Russia. First, we have to mention the practical benefits, including the compensation that Kyiv will receive for its efforts. Supporting wealthy countries is not purely an act of charity, and these countries understand that very well. Instead, they have been very willing to agree to resource deals with Kyiv in exchange for Ukraine's invaluable military support. According to Mr. Zelensky's firm statement, Ukraine will receive direct crude oil supplies to be refined in Europe. Along with that is a supply of diesel fuel, which the country is craving more than ever for its fight for survival. In other agreements, Ukraine will receive direct cash payments, allowing the Kyiv government full authority to allocate these financial resources to the most critical military efforts. Mr. Zelensky also pointed out a calculated move when wealthy countries could transfer air defense missiles that are less effective against Iranian firepower. However, these missiles are extremely valuable for protecting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which is being devastated. Another subtle and equally important point is that Ukraine is helping wealthy countries find ways to support Kyiv without having to take an overly tough stance against Russia, thus avoiding unnecessary backlash. When these countries agree to provide cash instead of directly supplying weapons, that's not a coincidence. Directly supplying weapons to Ukraine would create tremendous friction with Russia, a relationship that wealthy countries may not be enthusiastic about, but are also very hesitant to completely destroy. Transferring cash, however, is different. They know very well that the money will be used to support Ukraine's war effort, whether directly or indirectly, but once the funds leave their hands, they can wash their hands of responsibility. Russia may voice its objections, but if it does, the wealthy countries have every reason to reconsider other secret agreements that are benefiting Russia itself. In the end, these preliminary agreements are the perfect springboard for Ukraine to begin its journey to becoming a post-war arms exporting power. When the guns with Russia finally fall silent, Ukraine will naturally become one of the world's leading suppliers of modern drones. Other countries will crave Ukraine's support in re-establishing production lines, adapting technology in real time, and dealing with the ever-changing nature of the modern battlefield. In fact, the enthusiasm of prosperous countries has set a valuable precedent for other nations to become more open about post-war arms agreements. In mid-April, Germany began working with Ukraine to plan joint production of advanced drones and other systems, aiming to cover a wide range of missile and drone technologies. Ukraine has agreed to boost security cooperation with Syria. A surprising partnership is expected to bring Ukraine closer to Turkey, Syria's main patron. At home, Ukrainian startups are working to reinvent themselves to meet international demand. A prime example is 5Point, the company that designed Ukraine's Flamingo cruise missile, which is now aiming to create a new low-cost air defense system as early as next year. The situation Ukraine faces today is something they never wanted. They have been invaded by an opponent many times larger, stronger in military and economic power, one who seems determined to erase the name Ukraine from the world map at any cost. However, Ukraine has demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt and find hope, even in the most painful and dangerous circumstances. For most of the world, the Middle East war means instability and horror. But for Ukraine, they have turned the Iran conflict into a fateful opportunity. So what do you think about Ukraine exporting drone technology right in the midst of an intense war at home? If swarms of cheap drones can neutralize billion-dollar air defense systems, does it really mean the era of traditional military superpowers is coming to an end?